What happens when the only thing left after a mistake is a folder with your name on it? How does it feel to find your own laughter weaponized against you, not by the man you betrayed, but by the law itself? I never thought a night on my ex's couch would end with a stranger serving me papers, or that the truth would be printed out in black and white, more permanent than memory. The turning point wasn't waking up beside my ex. It was the detail I couldn't explain without lying. My name is Ivadne Hartley, but everyone calls me Ev. I'm 34, work in marketing for a mid-sized firm downtown, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was married to Caleb, a high school history teacher who's methodical about everything, from grading papers to organizing our spice rack. We'd been together 6 years, married for 3, and somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I was disappearing into his careful routines. That's how I justified what happened at Jasper's party. Jasper Lee was Caleb's friend first. They went to college together. But over the years, he became mine too. Actually, that's not quite right. Jasper was my ex-boyfriend from before I met Caleb, and when we all reconnected at a mutual friend's wedding 5 years ago, it seemed mature and modern that we could all be friends. Caleb was secure enough to handle it, I was committed enough to keep boundaries, and Jasper was charming enough to make it work. Until that Friday night in October, when everything unraveled. The party was supposed to be casual, just Jasper's usual crowd celebrating his promotion at the advertising agency where he worked. I'd told Caleb I'd be home by midnight, but the wine kept flowing, and the conversations kept getting more interesting. By 11:30, I was laughing harder than I had in months, feeling like the person I used to be before marriage made me responsible for remembering to buy toilet paper and schedule dentist appointments. "You know what your problem is, Ev?" Jasper said, refilling my glass with expensive red wine that tasted like rebellion. "You've forgotten how to have fun." "I have fun," I protested, but even as I said it, I knew it sounded defensive. When was the last time I'd done something spontaneous? Something that wasn't planned in Caleb's color-coded calendar? "When?" Jasper challenged, his green eyes sparkling with mischief. "When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because it fit into some schedule?" I couldn't answer, and that silence felt like proof of his point. The party wound down around 1 in the morning, but I wasn't ready to go home to Caleb's quiet disapproval of my late night. I wasn't drunk, I'm very careful about that, but I was buzzed enough to feel bold when Jasper suggested I crash on his couch instead of driving. "It's just sleeping," I told myself as he handed me one of his hoodies to wear. "Friends can sleep in the same space without it meaning anything." But when I woke up Saturday morning, I wasn't on the couch. I was in his bed, still wearing the hoodie, with his arm draped over my waist and his cologne saturating my hair. Nothing had happened. I was still fully clothed except for my shoes. But the intimacy of the moment hit me like cold water. I slipped out before he woke up, drove home in yesterday's clothes, and prepared my story. It was simple. The party ran late, I crashed on his couch, and I came home as soon as I woke up. All technically true, just missing a few details. Caleb was grading papers at the kitchen table when I walked in, his red pen moving in precise strokes across a stack of essays about the Industrial Revolution. "How was the party?" he asked without looking up. "Good, fun. You know how Jasper's friends are. Lots of laughing, probably too much wine." I kept my voice light, casual, the way I'd practiced in the car. He made a note in the margin of a paper. "You're home later than you said." "Yeah, it ran long. I ended up crashing on his couch instead of driving. Safer that way." That's when he looked up, and I saw something in his brown eyes that made my stomach clench. Not anger, exactly. More like calculation. "That was smart," he said evenly. "Safety first." I showered immediately, washing away the evidence of my night, and told myself that was the end of it. But over the next few days, I noticed small changes in Caleb's behavior. He was quieter than usual, more observant, He'd look at me sometimes, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. The confrontation came the following Thursday, a week after the party, when I was getting ready for work. "Ev," Caleb said from the bedroom doorway, his voice carefully neutral. "Can you help me understand something?" My hand stilled on my earrings. "Sure. What?" "When you stayed at Jasper's last week, you said you slept on his couch." "I did." The lie came automatically, defensively. "But when I asked why your hair smelled like his cologne, you said the couch was close to where he was sleeping, that the room was crowded." I turned to face him, forcing a laugh. "Caleb, what is this? Are you seriously interrogating me about sleeping arrangements at a party?" He didn't smile. Instead, he quietly held up his phone and showed me the screen. It was our shared location app, the one we'd set up for safety, so we'd know if the other person made it home okay. My little blue dot was clearly visible, moving from the party address to Jasper's apartment building at 2:17 a.m. It stayed there, unmoving, until 8:43 a.m. "Your phone says you weren't at a party location all night," he said calmly. "It says you were specifically at Jasper's place, in his apartment." My mouth went dry. The phone must be wrong. Those things glitch all the time. "Maybe," he agreed, "but there's something else." He swiped to our text thread and turned the screen toward me again. The last message from me, sent at 2:31 a.m., was a selfie I didn't remember taking. In it, I was smiling sleepily at the camera, clearly in someone's bedroom, wearing Jasper's grey hoodie. The hoodie I'd forgotten I was wearing when I took the picture. "I don't remember sending that," I whispered. "But you did," Caleb said. His voice was still calm, still measured, but there was something underneath it now. Something harder. "You sent me a photo of yourself in another man's bedroom, wearing his clothes, at 2:30 in the morning, after telling me you were sleeping on his couch." I stared at the photo, my mind racing. I must have been more affected by the wine than I thought. Must have taken it without thinking, maybe trying to prove to myself that nothing was happening. But looking at it now, seeing my relaxed smile and tousled hair, seeing the obvious intimacy of the setting. "Nothing happened," I said quickly. "I swear to you, Caleb, nothing happened. I ended up in his room instead of the couch, but we didn't." "Stop." His voice cut through my explanation like a blade. "Just stop." He took his phone back and slipped it into his pocket. When he looked at me again, his expression was completely unreadable. "I need you to understand something, Ev. I'm not angry about what happened. I'm angry about what you're doing right now." "What do you mean?" "You're lying to me. Even with the evidence right in front of you, you're still lying." He picked up his briefcase and headed for the door. "That tells me everything I need to know about where we stand." After he left, I sat on our bed for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger. Someone who would sleep in her ex's bed and then lie about it. Someone who would send incriminating photos and then claim not to remember. I told myself it really was nothing. That I was being honest about the important part. Nothing physical had happened between Jasper and me. But even as I repeated that justification, I knew Caleb was right about one thing. I was lying. And I was going to keep lying, because the truth was too complicated to explain, even to myself. The next few weeks passed in a strange, tense calm. Caleb didn't bring up the party again, but something fundamental had shifted between us. He was polite but distant, like a roommate rather than a husband. He still made coffee for both of us in the morning, still asked about my day when he got home from school. But there was a careful formality to it all that made my skin crawl. I tried to pretend everything was normal, but normal felt increasingly impossible when your husband looked at you like you were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You're being paranoid," my mother Roxana said when I called her 2 weeks after the party. "So you had a little fun. You're married, not buried. Caleb needs to lighten up." But my sister Lynn wasn't as supportive when I told her the same story. "Ev," she said carefully, You slept in your ex-boyfriend's bed and lied about it. That's not a little fun. That's a betrayal. Nothing happened, I insisted for what felt like the 100th time. That's not the point. The point is that you put yourself in a situation where something could have happened, and then you lied about it. Can you understand why Caleb would be hurt? I could, but admitting that felt like admitting I was wrong, and I wasn't ready to do that. Instead, I doubled down on my original story, telling myself and anyone who would listen that Caleb was overreacting. That's when I made my first real mistake. I started posting about it on social media. It began innocently enough, a photo from the original party with the caption, "Sometimes you need friends who remind you how to laugh." But when several people commented, asking why I looked so happy, I found myself responding with increasingly pointed jokes about uptight spouses and people who think fun is suspicious. The likes and laughing emojis felt like validation. Here were people who understood that I wasn't doing anything wrong, that I was just being social and enjoying myself. If Caleb couldn't appreciate that, maybe the problem was with him, not me. I posted a throwback photo of Jasper and me from college, with the caption, "Some friendships are worth keeping, even when they make others uncomfortable." When Caleb's sister Lydia commented with a simple "yikes," I replied publicly, "Sorry if mature adult friendships are confusing to some people." That's when I noticed Caleb had started screenshotting things. I caught him one evening, sitting at his laptop with his phone beside him, methodically saving images of my posts. When he saw me watching, he didn't try to hide what he was doing. "What's that for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Documentation," he said simply. "Documentation of what?" He looked at me for a long moment, then closed the laptop. "Evidence." The word sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to laugh. "Evidence? Caleb, what do you think this is, a court case? They're just social media posts." "Are they?" He stood up, gathering his papers with the same methodical care he brought to everything. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're publicly mocking our marriage and celebrating the man you cheated with." "I didn't cheat. You slept in his bed, Ev. You sent me a photo of yourself in his clothes from his bedroom in the middle of the night. And then you lied about it. What would you call that?" I wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because when he put it that way, when he stripped away all my rationalizations and justifications, it did sound like cheating. Even if nothing physical had happened, I'd crossed a line, and we both knew it. But instead of admitting that, I got defensive. "I call it sleeping off too much wine on a friend's couch," I snapped. "I call it you being jealous and controlling and trying to make me feel guilty for having friends. Friends don't usually send photos from each other's bedrooms at 2 a.m. It was an accident. I told you, I don't even remember taking it." "But you do remember getting into his bed instead of sleeping on the couch like you said you would." I stared at him, feeling trapped. Because yes, I remembered that. I remembered the moment when Jasper had softly suggested I'd be more comfortable in the bedroom. Remembered following him there. Remembered the thrill of rebellion as I climbed under his covers. I remembered, but I wasn't going to admit it. "You're being ridiculous," I said instead. "You're turning nothing into something because you can't stand that I have a life outside of your perfectly organized little world." That's when something in his expression changed. The hurt I'd been seeing for weeks hardened into something colder, more resolved. "Okay," he said quietly. "If that's how you want to play this, then that's how we'll play it." He walked out of the room, leaving me standing there with a growing sense that I'd just made a terrible mistake. But I was in too deep to back down now. Instead, I posted another photo. This one of me and Jasper from the night of the party, both of us laughing at something off camera. The caption read, "Life's too short to apologize for joy." Within an hour, it had dozens of likes and comments from friends who didn't know the full story. They saw a woman having fun with a friend, not a wife betraying her husband's trust. Their support felt like armor against Caleb's accusations. But when I went to bed that night, I found a notebook on Caleb's nightstand that I'd never seen before. It was open to a page filled with his neat handwriting, dates, times, and direct quotes from my social media posts. October 15th. Sometimes you need friends who remind you how to laugh. 47 likes, 12 comments. October 18th. Some friendships are worth keeping, even when they make others uncomfortable. 31 likes, 8 comments. October 22nd. Life's too short to apologize for joy. 52 likes, 15 comments. Below each entry, he'd written detailed notes about the context, the responses, and what he called escalating patterns of public humiliation. I closed the notebook quickly, my hands shaking. This wasn't just hurt feelings or jealousy. This was something else entirely, something systematic and deliberate, and far more serious than I'd realized. For the first time since the party, I felt genuinely scared. But instead of backing down, instead of having the honest conversation we clearly needed to have, I did what I'd been doing for weeks. I told myself he was overreacting, and I kept posting. The breaking point came at Caleb's family dinner 3 weeks later. His parents, Ellen and Richard Hartley, hosted monthly Sunday meals that I'd grown to dread even before our current crisis. They were polite people, but there was always an undercurrent of judgment about my career, my opinions, or my failure to produce grandchildren yet. This particular Sunday felt different from the moment we walked in. Ellen's smile was strained, Richard barely looked at me, and Lydia, Caleb's 27-year-old sister, who'd never liked me much anyway, was practically vibrating with hostile energy. "Ev," Ellen said as we sat down to pot roast and mashed potatoes, "how have you been, dear? You seem to be having quite a social media presence lately." My stomach dropped. Of course they'd seen the posts. Lydia followed me on Instagram, and she'd probably shared everything with the rest of the family. "I've been fine," I said carefully, "just enjoying time with friends." "Yes," Richard said, cutting his meat with precise strokes. "We've noticed." The table fell silent except for the clink of silverware on china. Caleb sat beside me, saying nothing, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. "Is there something you'd like to say?" I asked, looking around the table. Lydia set down her fork with a sharp click. "Actually, yes. I'd like to know what the hell you think you're doing." "Lydia," Ellen warned, but her daughter was already warming up. "No, Mum. Someone needs to say it." She turned to me with fire in her eyes. "You cheated on my brother, and now you're posting about it online like it's some kind of joke. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for him?" "I didn't cheat," I said automatically, but the words felt hollow even to me. "Really? Because there's a pretty clear photo of you in some guy's bedroom wearing his clothes. What would you call that?" "I call it sleeping off too much wine at a friend's place, which is what responsible adults do instead of driving drunk." "On his couch, right?" Lydia's voice was sharp with sarcasm. "Because that's what you told Caleb. Except the photo shows you in a bedroom." I glanced at Caleb, who was staring at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. He'd obviously told his family everything. The situation was more complicated than... "The situation was that you slept in your ex-boyfriend's bed and then lied about it," Lydia interrupted. "And when Caleb called you out, instead of apologizing, you started posting jokes about uptight spouses and mature adult friendships. You're publicly humiliating him." "That's not what I'm doing." "Then what are you doing?" This from Richard, whose voice carried the authority of 30 years as a high school principal. "Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you're celebrating your betrayal and mocking our son for being hurt by it." I looked around the table at their faces. Ellen's disappointment, Richard's stern disapproval, Lydia's open hostility. Even Caleb, who still hadn't said a word. "I'm not celebrating anything," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm just not going to apologize for having friends or for refusing to be controlled." "Controlled?" Lydia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He asked you not to sleep in your ex's bed. That's not control, that's basic respect. He asked me after the fact, and I didn't plan for it to happen. But you did plan to lie about it. I didn't lie, You told him you slept on the couch when you actually slept in the bed. That's lying. I felt cornered, defensive, angry at being ganged up on. Fine, maybe I simplified the truth because I knew he'd overreact, which is exactly what happened. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Caleb spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. Simplified the truth, he repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling it now? He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, setting it on the table between us. On the screen was my latest Instagram post from that morning, a photo of me and Jasper from the party, with the caption, "When loyalty becomes boring, humor helps. No regrets, due authentic life." I'd posted it impulsively, still angry from our argument the night before. Looking at it now, surrounded by his family's shocked faces, I realized how it must look to them. Humor helps, Lydia read aloud. No regrets, authentic life. She looked at me with something approaching disgust. You're actually proud of what you did. I'm proud of not letting anyone make me feel ashamed for having friends. Friends, Richard repeated. Is that what you call a man you send bedroom selfies to in the middle of the night? I didn't mean to send that photo. But you meant to take it, Caleb said quietly. You meant to get into his bed. You meant to spend the night there. And you meant to lie to me about it. I stared at him, seeing something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not hurt, not anger, but a kind of cold resolution that made my blood run cold. Caleb. And then, he continued, his voice still terrifyingly calm. When I confronted you with evidence, you decided to double down, to make jokes about it online, to mock me for being upset about my wife sleeping in another man's bed. That's not what I was doing. Then explain the posts, Ev. Explain uptight spouses, and people who think fun is suspicious, and life's too short to apologize for joy. Explain what that means if not mocking me. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Because he was right. That's exactly what I'd been doing, and we all knew it. I think, Ellen said gently, that maybe you two should go home and talk privately. But Caleb was already standing, pulling out his wallet to leave money for dinner. Actually, I think we're past talking. He walked out without another word, leaving me sitting at the table with his family's disappointed stares. I followed him to the car, my cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. That was cruel, I said as we drove home in silence. Was it? He kept his eyes on the road. Was it crueler than what you did? Or just more public? They're your family. They're supposed to support you no matter what. And you're my wife. You're supposed to support me too. But instead, you're making me a laughingstock on social media. I'm not... Ev. He pulled into our driveway and turned to look at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach clench with fear. I need you to understand something. This isn't just about one night anymore. This is about who you are. And who you are is someone who betrays trust and then mocks the person you betrayed for being hurt by it. That's not fair. Isn't it? He got out of the car, but before he closed the door, he said one more thing. I've been keeping track, Ev, of everything, and I want you to know that every post, every comment, every joke you make about this situation is being documented. Documented for what? But he was already walking toward the house, leaving me sitting in the car with a growing sense of dread. That night, I found another notebook on his nightstand. This one was thicker, more detailed, with printouts of my social media posts taped to the pages alongside his handwritten observations. At the bottom of the most recent entry, he'd written, "Subject continues to escalate public humiliation despite multiple opportunities for private resolution. Pattern suggests deliberate intent to damage reputation and relationship." I stared at the clinical language, the careful documentation, the methodical way he was building what looked like a case against me. For the first time since this whole thing started, I wondered if I was in real trouble. But instead of stopping, Instead of having the conversation we needed to have, I did what I'd been doing all along. I posted another photo. The photo I posted that night was my biggest mistake yet. It was a screenshot of a text conversation between Jasper and me, where he'd written, "Your husband needs to learn how to take a joke," and I'd responded with 3 laughing emojis and, "Some people are just born serious, I guess." I captioned it, "When your friends understand you better than your spouse does." Truth through real talk. I deleted it within an hour, realizing too late how terrible it looked, but the damage was done. Caleb had already seen it, already screenshotted it, and several of our mutual friends had commented before I took it down. The next morning, I woke up to find Caleb's side of the bed empty and cold. He'd left for work without waking me, without making coffee, without any of the small rituals that had defined our mornings for 6 years. I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Staying at my parents' tonight. Need space to think." That's when the real panic set in. I called in sick to work and spent the day trying to figure out how to fix this. I deleted every post I'd made about the situation, wrote and deleted a dozen different apology texts, and finally drove to Caleb's school to try to talk to him in person. "I'm sorry," I said when I cornered him in the parking lot after classes ended. "I know I've been handling this wrong. I know the posts were hurtful. I deleted them all." He looked at me with something like pity. "You deleted them after posting them, Ev. After making sure everyone we know saw them first." I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just hurt and defensive, and you decided to hurt me back, publicly, repeatedly. That wasn't my intention. Wasn't it? He unlocked his car but didn't get in. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been systematically destroying my reputation for weeks. First with your friends, then with mine, then with my family. What's next? My colleagues? My students' parents? Caleb, that's not..." "Do you know what happened today, Ev? Principal Morrison called me into his office because a parent saw your posts and asked if I was having marital problems that might affect my teaching. Do you understand what you've done?" I felt sick. I hadn't considered that his professional life might be affected by my social media activity. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't think..." "No, you didn't think. You just acted. You acted when you got into Jasper's bed. You acted when you lied about it. And you acted when you decided to make it public. And now I have to deal with the consequences." He got into his car, but before he drove away, he rolled down the window. "I'll be back tomorrow to get some things. I suggest you use tonight to think about whether you want to save this marriage or destroy it completely." He left me standing in the school parking lot, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. That evening, I tried calling my sister Lynn for support, but she wasn't sympathetic. "Ev, what were you thinking? Posting private conversations? Making jokes about your husband online? This isn't just about the party anymore. You've turned this into a public humiliation campaign." "I was just venting to friends." "You were publicly mocking your husband for being hurt that you slept in another man's bed. How did you think this was going to end?" I didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, Caleb came home while I was at work. When I returned that evening, I could see he'd been there. Clothes missing from his closet, toiletries gone from the bathroom, his laptop and important papers removed from the study. But he'd left something behind. A manila folder on the kitchen table with my name written on it in his careful handwriting. Inside were printouts of every social media post I'd made about our situation, organized chronologically with timestamps and engagement metrics, screenshots of comments from friends and family, photos of the text conversation I'd posted and deleted, even printouts of Jasper's posts that mentioned me or referenced our friendship. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note. "I tried to handle this privately, but you made it public. Now it has to be handled publicly too." My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages. He'd documented everything, not just my posts, but the responses they'd generated, the way our mutual friends had started taking sides, the comments from his family members expressing concern and disappointment. There was even a section devoted to my workplace interactions. Somehow, he'd found out about the conversations I'd been having with colleagues about our marriage problems, the way I'd been portraying him as controlling and jealous to anyone who would listen. The final page was a timeline of events, starting with the night of the party and ending with yesterday's deleted post. At the bottom, he'd written, "Pattern of behavior suggests deliberate campaign to damage reputation and relationship in service of justifying initial betrayal." I sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the evidence of my own destruction. Seeing it all laid out like this, organized and documented and stripped of context, I realized how it must look to an outside observer. I looked like someone who'd cheated on her husband and then launched a public campaign to humiliate him for being upset about it, which, I was starting to realize, was exactly what I'd done. I tried calling Caleb, but he didn't answer. I sent texts apologizing, promising to do better, begging him to come home so we could talk. No response. Finally, I drove to his parents' house, but Ellen answered the door with a sad smile and a firm refusal to let me in. "He needs time, dear. You've hurt him very badly." "I know. I want to make it right." "Then you should have thought of that before you made it wrong. So publicly and so deliberately." She closed the door gently but firmly, leaving me standing on the porch like a stranger. Over the next week, I tried everything I could think of to reach him. I wrote long letters explaining my side of things. I sent flowers to his classroom. I even showed up at his favorite coffee shop every morning, hoping to run into him. Nothing worked, but I noticed other things happening. Mutual friends stopped responding to my messages. Invitations to social events dried up. Even my colleagues at work started treating me differently, like I was someone who couldn't be trusted. The isolation was suffocating, but it was also clarifying. For the first time since this whole thing started, I was forced to sit with the reality of what I'd done without the validation of likes and comments and supportive friends telling me I was right. And what I saw wasn't pretty. I'd betrayed my husband's trust, lied about it, and then spent weeks publicly humiliating him for being hurt by my betrayal. I'd turned our private pain into public entertainment, made our marriage into a joke, and destroyed relationships that had taken years to build. But even as I recognized all of this, even as I felt genuine remorse for the first time, I still believed it could be fixed. I still thought that if I could just get Caleb to sit down and talk to me, I could explain my side of things, and we could work through this. I was wrong about that too. The process server found me at work on a Tuesday morning in November, 3 weeks after Caleb had moved out. I was in the middle of a presentation to a client when my assistant knocked on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who needs to see Ms. Hartley immediately. He says it's urgent." The client looked annoyed, but I excused myself and walked to the lobby, where a middle-aged man in a cheap suit was waiting with a manila envelope. "Ivadne Hartley?" "Yes." "You've been served." He handed me the envelope and walked away, leaving me standing in my office lobby with a dozen curious colleagues watching. My hands shook as I tore it open and saw the words that would change everything. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Caleb was divorcing me. I stumbled back to the conference room, mumbled some excuse about a family emergency, and locked myself in my office to read the documents. They were thorough, professional, and devastating. He was citing irreconcilable differences, but had attached a detailed timeline of events, starting with the night of the party. Every lie, every social media post, every public humiliation was documented with timestamps and screenshots. But the worst part was the section labeled Evidence of Deliberate Reputation Damage. It wasn't just my posts, it was the ripple effect they'd created. Screenshots of comments from friends and family members expressing concern about Caleb's controlling behavior. Messages between mutual friends discussing our marriage problems. Even records of conversations I'd had with colleagues where I'd portrayed him as jealous and unreasonable. He'd been watching, documenting, and building a case for weeks. The petition also included a request for protection from continued harassment and defamation, which made my blood run cold. Was he going to try to get a restraining order against me? I called the number listed for his attorney and was told Mr. Hartley was not interested in mediation or reconciliation. The divorce would proceed according to the timeline outlined in the documents. That night, I drove to his parents' house again, but this time Richard answered the door. "You need to leave," he said firmly. "Caleb doesn't want to see you, and frankly, neither do we. Please, I just want to talk to him. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this." "Mistakes?" Richard's voice was sharp with anger. "You call systematically humiliating our son on social media a mistake? You call turning your marriage into a public joke a mistake?" I was hurt and confused, and you were cruel, deliberately and publicly cruel, and now you're facing the consequences. He started to close the door, but I put my hand out to stop him. "Please, I love him. I know I handled this wrong, but I love him." Richard looked at me with something approaching pity. "If this is how you treat people you love, Ev, then you don't understand what love means." The door closed with a final click, leaving me alone on the porch again. Over the next few days, I tried everything I could think of to reach Caleb. I sent emails to his school account, left voicemails on his phone, even tried contacting him through social media. Nothing worked, but I did notice that my own social media accounts were hemorrhaging followers. Friends who had supported me through the initial drama were now distancing themselves as word of the divorce spread. The narrative was shifting, and I was no longer the fun-loving wife standing up to a controlling husband. Now I was the woman who'd cheated and then publicly humiliated her husband when he called her out. My workplace became uncomfortable too. Harold, my manager, called me into his office for what he diplomatically called a reputation management conversation. "Ev, I need you to understand that your personal life is starting to affect your professional life. We've had clients asking questions, colleagues expressing concerns. This company can't afford to be associated with someone who's seen as untrustworthy or unprofessional. My personal life has nothing to do with my work performance. Doesn't it? Because from what I understand, you've been using company time and resources to manage this situation, and your judgment in general has been questionable." I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. I had been distracted, had been using work hours to deal with my personal crisis, had been venting to colleagues about my marriage problems. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to resolve this situation quickly and quietly. No more drama, no more public spectacle. Handle your divorce with dignity, or we'll have to consider whether you're the right fit for this position." The threat was clear: clean up my act or lose my job. That night, I sat in my empty house. Caleb had taken more of his things while I was at work, and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a happily married woman with a successful career and a solid social circle. Now I was facing divorce, professional consequences, and social isolation, all because of one night and the choices I'd made afterward. But even then, even facing the complete destruction of my life, I still couldn't quite accept full responsibility. I told myself that Caleb was overreacting, that divorce was an extreme response to what had essentially been a misunderstanding. I convinced myself that he was being vindictive, using the legal system to punish me for hurting his feelings. I was still telling myself these lies when the second set of papers arrived. This time, it wasn't a process server. It was a certified letter from Caleb's attorney, containing what they called supplemental evidence for the divorce proceedings. Inside were printouts of every digital interaction I'd had since the night of the party. Text messages with Jasper where we'd joked about Caleb's reaction. Screenshots of private messages between me and friends where I'd called Caleb controlling and jealous. Even records of my location data showing every time I'd driven past his parents' house or his school in my attempts to contact him. At the bottom of the stack was a restraining order application, already filled out but not yet filed. A note from his attorney explained that Mr. Hartley was prepared to seek legal protection if I continued my pattern of harassment and stalking behavior. That's when it finally hit me. This wasn't just about the party anymore. This wasn't even about the social media posts. This was about who I was as a person, and who I was someone who betrayed trust, lied about it, publicly humiliated the person I'd betrayed, and then refused to accept responsibility for any of it. Caleb wasn't overreacting. He was protecting himself from me. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I realized that maybe he was right to do so. The final confrontation happened on a cold December morning, exactly 2 months after the party that started everything. I was leaving for work when I saw Caleb's car in our driveway, our former driveway, since the house was going to be sold as part of the divorce settlement. He was loading the last of his belongings into his trunk, moving with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. I'd been hoping for this moment for weeks, a chance to talk to him face to face without lawyers or family members or legal documents between us. "Caleb," I called out, walking toward him across the frost-covered lawn. "Please, can we just talk?" He looked up from the box he was loading, and I was shocked by how different he looked. Thinner, more serious, but also somehow more settled, like he'd found peace in his decision to leave me. "There's nothing left to talk about, Ev." "There's everything to talk about. This is crazy. We're throwing away 6 years over one mistake." "One mistake?" He closed the trunk and turned to face me fully. "Is that really how you see this? As one mistake? I slept on a friend's couch instead of driving drunk. Yes, I ended up in his bed. And yes, I should have been more upfront about that, but—" "Stop." His voice was quiet but firm. "Just stop. We both know that's not what happened, and we both know this isn't about one night." He pulled out his phone and opened what looked like a document folder. "Do you want to know what this is about? It's about 47 separate social media posts mocking me for being upset about your betrayal. It's about you sharing private text conversations to humiliate me. It's about you telling our friends, your colleagues, and my family that I'm controlling and jealous for being hurt that my wife slept in another man's bed." I was defensive. "You were cruel. Systematically, deliberately, publicly cruel." He scrolled through the folder, and I could see screenshots of posts I'd forgotten I'd made, comments I'd left on other people's photos, private messages I'd sent to mutual friends. "You turned our marriage into entertainment, Ev. You made me into a joke. That wasn't my intention, wasn't it?" He looked at me with something like pity. "Because I have records of you telling 3 different people that you were teaching me a lesson about trying to control you. I have screenshots of you laughing about my pathetic jealousy with your co-workers. I have evidence of you actively trying to turn people against me." The final truth. I stared at Caleb, seeing my words reflected back through his evidence, not as venting, but as calculated attacks. "I was hurt," I whispered. "I felt attacked." "So you attacked publicly, for weeks." His voice held cold finality. "The worst part isn't the betrayal. It's that when confronted, you chose to make me the villain instead of taking responsibility. You protected your ego over our marriage, your reputation over my feelings." Tears came, but I held them back. "We can get counseling. With what trust? You've shown who you are when caught. Deflect, lie, attack. Why rebuild with that?" "Because I love you. I loved you enough to try privately, but love needs respect. You showed none." He walked to his car. I followed. "I can change." "Change requires honesty. You still call it handling it wrong, not betrayal." He drove away, leaving divorce papers in the mailbox. His note: "This is protection, not punishment. I deserve better. So do you." I signed that afternoon. The evidence, my posts, lies, deflections, was undeniable. 3 months later, I deleted my social media. Caleb was happy with someone new. I finally admitted, I destroyed our marriage through deliberate, selfish choices. He was right, I was wrong.